you'll see how I do. I'm pretty loud, so I don't think you'll have trouble hearing me. Thank you for that lovely introduction. As was mentioned, I'm a family nurse practitioner. I've worked for the last 30 years with vulnerable youth, first in the San Francisco Department of Public Health, working with youth, homeless and runaway youth, and incarcerated youth, and then went to UCSF, where I am now the director of the Family Nurse Practitioner Program. And I have a joint appointment in adolescent and young adult medicine. So my clinical work is in adolescent and young adult medicine, and in fact, I finished clinic today and jumped in the car and came up here. So I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to come here and talk with you today. And you know, in addition to my training and my experience working with young people, I'm also a mom, and I have a almost 27-year-old and an almost 18-year-old. So I have my 17-year-old is graduating from Mission High in San Francisco this year. So I do know the road you are walking on. I have walked it myself, in addition to trying to really work with our trainees, medical, nursing, social work, and psychology trainees to do a good job of working with young people. So what we're going to focus on tonight, I'm going to give you a little bit of background information. I think it's important to have a sense of what the data is, but what's most important is that you really know and understand how very important your role is. Many parents, as their children move into adolescence, feel like, well, you know, now it's really time to let go, and they need to be the captain of their own ships, and all of that is true, but they still need an enormous amount of guidance. They really do care what you think, and we've got data to show that they really do care what you think. It's not all about their peers. It is about their peers, but it's not just about their peers. And the handouts that I had sent up to Jessica one is from the National Campaign to Prevent Teen and Unwanted Pregnancy. And this is a great piece of work that's 10 tips for parents that is absolutely grounded in the data, what research we have, what we know works, what we know makes a difference. And so we're going to be talking about some of their findings, but it's really a very valuable guide. The other one is from the American Psychological Society or Association, and talks a little bit about brain development. There are some great articles, popular articles on brain development. If you happen to like Googling and finding very readable things about brain development, National Geographic has a beautiful piece that talks about adolescent brain development and that interaction between how the brain is developing and how young people do or do not make decisions. So let's get started. So first of all, I just want to emphasize that when we talk about development, mostly, you know, the hallmark of adolescent development is puberty. And everybody kind of thinks about development as what happens to their bodies. And this is what young people think about too. They're very preoccupied about what happens with their bodies. But development is really global. All aspects of a young person change in adolescence. And brain development, we're finding, is more and more, an understanding of brain development is really a key to understanding all of those kind of disconnects and inconsistencies that we find in our adolescence. But development is not just physical, it's not just the brain, it's also psychological, it's emotional, it's sexual, cognitive, social, ethical, and spiritual development. And all of these aspects, all of these different contextual aspects come together to really influence how a young person changes and grows, the decisions they make, the paths they take, and how they interact with their families. So some important things to remember in terms of normal adolescent development. Every young person is very unique, and each young person has their own path. But that said, there are some pretty predictable stages of development, some things that we expect all young people to go through. The variety is huge, particularly in early adolescence. So most of you, some of you, are there any parents of 9th graders? So you have early adolescence still. The girls may be much more like middle adolescence and more mature. The boys, if you have a boy who's 14, he's probably still pretty early in terms of his development. So the range in early adolescence is very, very broad, and really from having no development at all in terms of growth and change at age 14 to being full-on developed is all in the range of normal when we talk about physical development. The challenge with adolescent development is, first of all, it's not this nice, synchronous, continuous process where you just kind of get on the track and go. There's, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. And it doesn't all line up. If it all lined up, we'd be in great shape. If physical development, cognitive development, emotional development, psychological development all came together in a package and kind of walked in line, it'd be perfect, but it's not like that. So what happens is we have kids who have very advanced physical development, whose emotional development is not there yet. We have kids with great cognitive skills who maybe physically aren't developing or psychologically are still quite immature. So it doesn't all move together in a package. And this is where you really find challenges with young people, because the world treats them the way they look, right? So if they look like a little kid, they get treated like a little kid. And they may be really offended by that. They might be great abstract thinkers. They might be full of social activism and great ideas, but they're treated like a little kid. And on the other hand, the young person who develops early and at age 14 looks like, it's usually a girl in this case, looks like she's 16 and the world treats her like she's 18, is an accident waiting to happen. Because the world responds to what they see. They treat her like she's grown, but her body may be grown, but the rest of her isn't. So her problem-solving skills, her understanding, her decision-making skills, maybe very appropriately, a 12 to 14-year-old in this very mature body. So those of you who have early maturing children, what they really need are skills and advice and protection and the opportunity to be the younger kids that they are instead of the bodies that they look like. They often don't know what to make of, for example, an early maturing girl. They don't know what to make of that attention that they get from older teenagers and adults. They may be a little flattered, they're kind of embarrassed, but mostly they don't know what to make of it. And it's really incumbent upon us as parents to be able to teach them that what your 12-year-old says to the guy at the corner store who asks her for a date is, "What's wrong with you? I'm 12, I'm gonna tell my mom," because she doesn't know how to respond. And maybe she's a little bit flattered, and maybe she thinks it would be kind of cool to go out with this young man, and he's kind of cute. But it really is problematic because her problem-solving skills, her preparation is not such that it's a good idea for her right now to be dating a 16, 18, 20-year-old, okay? So this kind of sums it up. I'm a great fan of Calvin and Hobbes, and there we have dear Calvin with Hobbes, and you can see he's already gone through puberty, right? He hit his height acceleration, and he's this very big guy. But you can see also that he's still kind of a child. And that's what we see in adolescence, is that kind of flip-flop between what they look like, sometimes what they act like, and often how they feel inside. So these are the stages of adolescent development. And you can see that there's a huge range. These ages are an indicator, but not necessarily consistent with where your child's development may be. But you can see there's quite a range. And if you just kind of think about where your kid is, your 9th graders are generally early adolescents. You can see that girls enter adolescence earlier, and boys don't catch up until really their 20s. So you can see girls enter adolescence earlier, the boys come a little later, the range is pretty wide. And this is important as we look at the different characteristics of early, middle, and late adolescence. So your 9th graders are early adolescents. Your 10th and 11th graders generally are middle adolescents. Your 12th graders may be middle adolescents. They may be moving into late adolescence. Again, there's quite a range. And it starts out really based on secondary sexual development, their physical development. But over time, this is much more linked to their cognitive development, their problem-solving skills, their ability to make decisions and follow through on them. So I mentioned the brain, and what I want to point out to you is that the brain is really a work in progress in adolescence. And data now shows that probably somewhere between 26 and 30, the brain actually, in terms of structurally how it looks and how it functions, is an adult brain. And up until then, it is a developing brain. So why is this important? Well, the brain develops back to front, okay? And the most primitive parts of our brain are in the back. So but it takes a long time to get all the way to the prefrontal cortex that can kind of modulate, that can prioritize. That's really the seat of executive decision making. It takes a long time to get there, and that part of the brain develops last in brain development. And you can see here these areas that are lighter, hotter, the red colors, the greens, the yellows, are areas where there's a lot of activity. Now the size of the brain, you have about an adult-sized brain by the time you're 5 years old, in terms of the size of the brain. Obviously, what's around the brain, the encasement is not adult size, because if little kids put on a hat, an adult's hat, and it's kind of rolling around on their head. But the brain itself is pretty much the size it's going to be. It's not going to get a whole lot bigger. What happens in adolescence is really changes in function and changes in white and gray matter and connections. So the big changes that go on are a process that's called pruning, which is where the synapses, the conduits for nerve connections, the connections are called synapses, and those connections become refined. And the pruning part of this is that those connections that children do not use die off. A good example of this is that second language acquisition. It's very easy to acquire second language under the age of about 12 to 14. After the age of 12 to 14, you can absolutely acquire a second language, but you have to work a lot harder at it. You'll probably always have an accent that's your home language or your first language accent, overlaying your second language. Whereas if you acquire that language under the age of about 12 to 14, it's often accent-free, and there's much greater facility in developing it. Why is this? The brain is completely primed for language acquisition in childhood. That's one of the big things about human beings, is that we acquire language to communicate, and our brains are absolutely set up to do that. Once we get to about 12 or 14, the job is done, right? We acquired our language, we know how to communicate in our language, and those connections die off. You're not using them anymore. You're not acquiring language. You may be refining vocabulary, but you're not acquiring language. And so those connections die off. What's left are the connections that are used, and the second thing that happens in early adolescence is that those connections get much faster and more efficient, because there's a process called myelination, which is like the coating on the wire, the rubber on the wire that keeps the signal transmission inside the wire instead of scattering out. Well, the same thing happens in the brain. And so those two processes, myelination and pruning, really change the functional aspects of the brain. The parts of the adolescent brain that respond to stimulus are also different than where the brain responds to stimulus in an adult. Adolescents tend to see facial expressions, and this has been done with what are called fMRIs, so it's MRIs that actually are real time, so they can see what's happening in the brain, what areas light up. So an adult sees this, and what do you see? What does that mean? How do you interpret that?
Surprise.
Surprise, absolutely. And you process that in your frontal lobe. You saw that and you processed it in your frontal lobe. An early adolescent sees that, and first of all, they process it in their limbic system, in the most basic part of their brain, the part of their brain that's responsible for fight or flight. Second of all, consistently, and they've done these with standardized photographs, consistently, adolescents interpret that as anger. Go figure, okay? So they walk in the room, and you look at what they're wearing, and you go, oh, because you're surprised, and they're immediately ready to either run out the door or get in a fight with you because they think you're angry. So it's no wonder that we miscommunicate all the time with our adolescents, because they're processing information differently, they're interpreting information differently, and they're reacting in a much less modulated way. They don't have what's called that emotional intelligence, that connection between the basic part of the brain and the prefrontal lobe, because the prefrontal lobe still isn't working that well. So every kid is different. Some kids really get it. It happens at different ages, but these are some of the things that go into that disconnect or misunderstandings that happen between adolescents and their parents. So I've mentioned a little bit about brain development. I think one of the things that's most frustrating for parents is how impulsive young people are and trying to understand this impulsivity. So we've talked about the prefrontal lobe. This is the CEO of the brain. It's where reasoning ability, goal setting, prioritization, this is where it happens. I've mentioned to you this difference between what gets triggered in adolescence, the limbic system, in adults, the prefrontal lobe, in response. And that part of the brain that really modulates and interprets and exerts control over impulses is truly not well developed until about age 26. Now, the insurance companies have known this a really long time, right? When does your insurance rate go down? 25 or 26, exactly. They just looked at the actuarial tables, and what they saw was people 25 and under get in a lot more accidents. Part of that, obviously, is definitely experience. They've been driving for less time. But a lot of it is brain development. It just took neuroscience a lot longer to figure it out than it took the insurance companies to figure it out. So risk-taking is normative and expected in adolescence. There's healthy risk-taking, there's less healthy risk-taking, but it's something that happens. And because of this development of back to front, adolescents tend to prefer physical activity. They need to move. They are less than optimal in their planning and judgment. They engage in more risky and impulsive behaviors. And they don't really think about the consequences. So when you say to your kid, didn't you realize that if you stayed up all night talking to your best friend and didn't study for your calculus test, you were going to get an F on that calculus test, and now how are you going to get into the college that you want to get into, and you're going on and on with all your future projection? No, they did not realize that, right? They can, you know, when you walk them through, they can go, okay, I get it, yes, but they're not thinking about the consequences. They're in the moment. They tend to be impulsive. They tend to act before they think. So, you know, they can probably make up for that F on the calculus test, but they can't always make up for that unintended pregnancy that occurred because they really weren't thinking, even though they've sat in health class and they have learned about how to prevent pregnancy, and you've talked to them about how important it is to wait, and you've talked with them about how important it is if they're going to have sex, that they use protection. Hot cognitions, those things that happen in the moment, they're not thinking about the consequences. They are in the moment, they are acting on their impulses, they are not engaging in reasoned decision making. That's one of the reasons that just waiting until 15 to start having sex, I'm not here to advocate as the mother of a 17-year-old girl that you start having sex at 15. However, when you look at all the negative consequences of adolescent sexuality, sexually transmitted infections, unintended pregnancies, unhealthy relationships, they are all associated with what's called an early sexual debut, and that's 14 or under. Okay? So it's not that 15-year-olds are particularly well prepared, but they're a lot more able to do cause and effect thinking. They're closer to abstract thinkers. They can figure it out a little better. They can modulate their impulses a little better. So risk-taking really is a question of balance. You have reasoning and you have emotional dysregulation. And you can see that in adolescence we have over here, so here's the prefrontal lobe development, and it's being really overweighed by the emotional dysregulation in early and middle adolescence. And so what we need to do is help our young people find ways to take those risks that they need to take, to try things out, to learn from experience while still being safe. So this is early adolescence. You can see the girls in the front look like budding teenagers, and the boys in the back look like little dudes, and that's exactly what they are. This is a middle school picture. But a lot of ninth graders kind of look like this as well. Now you can imagine if those budding adolescents there in the front were looking for an object of romantic interest, it would probably not be those little dudes behind them, right? And this is one of the problems with how we've set up our educational system. Middle school does not make a lot of sense. You know, I'm of the generation that we had, and many parts of the country still do this, elementary school, which was through 6th grade, so the 6th graders were the oldest of the little kids, not the youngest of the middle kids, right? And then we had junior high school, so that was the 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, and then high school was 10th, 11th, and 12th. With middle school and high school, the way it is in California and many other states, we've shifted down. Those sixth graders are in middle school, so if they're early developers, they're going to look around for who looks like me, and they're going to affiliate with the older kids, with the eighth graders. Then they get to ninth grade, and again, if these are the ninth graders and those are the ninth grade boys, those girls are looking at the 11th graders, right? They're not looking at their age peers. And normative behaviors for middle adolescents are not the same as for early adolescents and are not the same as for late adolescents. So again, you know, one of the things that many schools do is that they separate the younger kids. In middle school, they might have recess at different times for the sixth graders than for the seventh and eighth. I don't know what you do in your high schools, but many high schools also keep the freshmen a bit separated from the rest of the campus because they are going, you know, they are seeing modeled behaviors that they're not really ready to engage in. So these are some of the characteristics of early adolescents. They're very preoccupied with their body changes. They're wondering, their big question is, am I normal? And normal is what they think everybody else is because everyone's hiding behind their locker and, you know, nobody really knows what's going on. But they are comparing themselves to their peers and trying to figure out if they're normal. And so they need a lot of reassurance that normal is pretty much anywhere along the spectrum in terms of development in early adolescence. They're very concerned with their body image and with privacy. The kid that was parading around half naked last week is barricading the door and locking it and putting signs to keep out. This week, they begin to separate from the family, and there's increased parent-child conflict, but it's this kind of low-level bickering that parents tend to take really seriously, and adolescents tend to blow off. So, you know, Johnny and Mom have this blowout, right? And Mom's yelling at Johnny, and John's cursing out Mom, and he goes in his room, and he slams the door, and he goes to bed. And Mom and Dad spend half the night talking about what are we going to do about Johnny, and I feel so bad about what happened with Johnny, and we've got to talk with Johnny. And in the morning, Johnny emerges, and they sit down at the breakfast table, and Mom and Dad say, Johnny, we really need to talk about what happened last night. And Johnny's gone, forget it, Ma, it doesn't matter, and off he goes. Because it doesn't matter to him, he's done, right? We're stuck, but he's done. Because this low-level bickering, it doesn't bother them. It bothers us a lot more than it bothers them. They tend to be very preoccupied and moody. Now, this is not to say that we don't see depression in early adolescence, that we don't see bipolar disorder in early adolescence, but our threshold for diagnosing those conditions is much higher because just normal early adolescence is very, very unstable emotionally. They're very unstable. They can be, you know, the sunshine in the room one minute and the thundercloud the next. They can be the cuddly little kid that you have known all their lives one minute and the belligerent teenager the next. They're very unstable. So the range of emotion is not very smooth. They tend to hang out with their same-sex friends and should really be encouraged to associate in groups, including if they want to date, that should be dating in groups with parental supervision. Not going to make you the most popular parent with your kid, but it will protect them. Okay? They're not ready to be cut loose. They have very poor judgment. They are very interested in their relationships with peers, but they are very influenced by their parents. And I'll show you some of that data in a minute. And they are very concrete thinkers. Okay? Everything is in the here and now. It's my experience. It's my friend's experience. Don't bother me with the facts and figures and what might happen. I'm right here, right now. Now, that said, there are some very abstract thinkers who are early adolescents, but typically they're pretty much in the present. So when most people think about teenagers, it's the middle adolescent that they think about. And middle adolescents have some very different characteristics than early adolescents. So middle adolescents are very concerned with their looks, and they're trying to figure out if they're attractive, and it may not be attractive to you, but that's okay. They're trying to figure out if they're attractive to themselves and their peers. They want increased independence, and they need increased independence, but again, it's a process, not an event. It's not suddenly they're ready for it all. So it's in a stepwise fashion. The peer group really becomes very important, and this is when they tell you, whatever you tell them, they tell you everybody's doing it, everybody gets to, everybody's wearing this. When I was a kid, my mother used to tell me, when I tell you no, don't tell me who. But it's a very typical response. Whatever limit you set, they're going to push that limit, and they're going to push it by telling you that all their friends, nobody has to, everybody gets to. And it's helpful for you to know their friends and know the families of their friends. It's actually very protective for your child if you know your child's friends and their families. They are experimenting with relationships and sexual behaviors, and I'll show you the data from your schools, but the data is by 11th grade. National data is about 60% of young people report sexual activity. By age 18, about 80% of young people report sexual activity. So it's not 12th grade, but age 18, which for a lot of kids are out of 12th grade. They are really forming their sexual orientation and identity, and we are finding that young people are really thinking about their sexual orientation and identity much earlier than they used to. They have more information, they have more access to information, and we also have, there's just more openness in society to think about it, talk about it, struggle with it. But they, again, really need a space where they can explore that, and families that are receptive to hearing what their process is. They are becoming abstract thinkers, but when stressed, they'll often kind of revert back to a very concrete thinking. And they are looking for their role models, and they are quite idealistic and altruistic. This is really sort of the height of engagement. They are very interested in social activism and being engaged, and it's a really good time to help them find what is their role, what is the contribution they can make, that they can really feel like they have something to give back to their communities, to their families, to their church, to their school. When they feel that they have meaning and a contribution to make, they do much better. It's very protective for them to be engaged in pro-social activities. And then we have our late adolescents that we hope are all going to be graduating. And in late adolescence, they start to approximate adults, but they are very far from adults. And in my clinic, we see young people up to age 25. And the biggest difference between the young adults and the adolescents is that they have less parental supervision, less parental guidance, and more legal rights. But in terms of their decision making, they are not, they're definitely maturing, they make better decisions, they're deeper thinkers, but they've still got a long ways to go. When you look at the data around, for example, contraceptive use in unintended pregnancy in young adults, it's called the fog zone. They have the information, but they really are not acting on it often. So in late adolescence, they're almost autonomous, but certainly not totally autonomous. And as we have a society that expects higher education and graduate education, it makes them, at least financially, a lot less autonomous. They should, in terms of their body image and gender role, the definition, it's pretty secured by now. They are thinking about the world in addition to thinking about themselves, so they really are developing a much more general worldview. They should be abstract thinkers. Not everyone becomes an abstract thinker, but people who have the capacity for abstract thinking probably should be there by late adolescence, early adulthood. They're much more emotionally stable. So if you saw the emotional range that you see in early adolescence, in a late adolescent, it would be diagnosable. Okay, so we tolerate it in early adolescence because we know they're very unstable. By late adolescence, they should be much more stable, and if they're that moody, and they may very well have a mental health issue. They're pretty settled in terms of their sexual orientation. They may or may not be sharing it with you, but they're generally pretty settled. They know themselves. They have developed the ability, even the boys, to express feelings in words. And this is one of the things that happens for boys in particular in early and middle adolescence. They don't have a lot of feeling vocabulary. They have a really hard time talking about their feelings. They don't want to talk about their feelings. They're not comfortable talking about their feelings. Again, these are generalizations. You might have a boy who does nothing but talk about his feelings, but in general, boys kind of lag behind. And we don't have a society that really encourages them to be in touch with or talk about their feelings. Girls have a lot more skills in those areas earlier. They are concerned about the future. If they're not concerned about the future, you need to be concerned about them because they're at the cusp of really major transitions, and they're very aware of at least those legal transitions at the age of 18. So they should be thinking forward. They may not know exactly what they want to do, and that's okay. A lot of young people need to experiment and try things out and start with one major and change to another and have one plan and change it up for a different plan. But they should be thinking about it. They should be planning. And they should be making some transitions to adult roles. Again, not to total autonomy, but to adopting some adult roles and responsibilities. So all of this is to kind of set the stage for talking about adolescent sexuality, because if you can kind of keep in mind what's happening in terms of brain development, in terms of social development, in terms of psychological and emotional development, then some of the things that happen in adolescence make a lot more sense. So this is the data, this is national data cut by grade, gender, and race. So you can see the blue is female here, and the green is male, and this is ever had sex, but not by grade.
I know.
It should be by grade, but it's not. That's terrible. I substituted out the data last night because this was more recent data, and I picked the wrong one. So my apologies. So this is just only cut by race. But what you see when you cut by grade is a really predictable pattern of increase in sexual activity over time. Now, when a kid says, when we talk about sexual activity, we don't mean that they're always having sex, but that they've ever had sex. So this is the data from your schools, and unfortunately I didn't have a graph for Drake, but you can see Redwood High School. This is ever had sex at almost 40%, and this is never had sex. And this is for all grades. This is for your 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders aggregate data, okay? And then this is the Drake data, and it is by grade. And you can see this very predictable progression with 18% of your 9th graders, not 0, moms and dads, 18% of the 9th graders at Drake report having had sex, and then a predictable increase up to 12th grade where 62% report ever having had sex. So if you were thinking that this is something that you can put off for a while, that you can worry about it before they go to college or move out of the house, think again, okay? It's here, it's now, it's an important issue to deal with. Because young people are going to do what they're going to do, and they'll do it with or without your support, but your support makes a really big difference in how they navigate things. So what are the influences on this decision making? So the national campaign to prevent teen and unplanned pregnancy has this great survey that they do every couple of years called With One Voice, where it's a huge national telephone survey where they talk to households with an adolescent in the household, and they get parental permission to talk to the adolescent, and they talk to the parent, and they talk to households where there's a parent who has an adolescent. And they ask them these questions around sexual decision making and influences and feeling pressured or forced. And you can see that parents and teens see things slightly differently. So these are youth over here. These are parents over here. I think parents are starting to get starting to understand that yes, they actually have a big influence. This data, when we looked at it 15 years ago, this was a tiny. Parents thought they were a tiny little piece of the pie. So you can see that parents are quite influential. So are friends, but not more influential than parents. Parents and youth kind of rate the media about the same. Youth rate their religious leaders as influencing them much more than parents. Parents underestimate their influence. Siblings are also influential. Teachers and educators, that's this little 4% in here, and here's the big 10% of someone else. Okay, so you can see that parents are getting the message that they make a difference and that their opinion matters, but they're still not quite lining up with young people. So this is overall, when it comes to your teen's decision about sex, who is most influential. And you can still see the lion's share of influences with parents, not peers. So this is just cut by gender, males and females. And you can see, again, that they don't quite line up. Girls rank their parents as more influential than boys, and their friends as slightly less influential than boys. Again, the media sits at that 9% there. Girls pay more attention to their religious leaders than boys do. Siblings come out about the same, and we have this persistent 4% of teachers and educators. So we think we have a great influence, but hey, guess again. And then by age differences. So you can see, and again, this is probably pretty predictable, right? Here are your younger adolescents, your 12 to 14-year-olds. Here are your older adolescents, your 15 to 19-year-olds. You can see that younger adolescents they're closer to their parents. They're more influenced by their parents. They are more impacted by their parents' opinions, and their friends are less significant. Whereas as young people get older, still parents with greater influence than friends, but the distribution is a little bit different. And then there's this issue about pressure. So I always find this fascinating. I know, take a minute and look at this. So the question is, even teens who haven't had sex say they feel pressured to have it. From which of the following sources have you ever felt pressure to have sex? And you can see this very significant difference between girls and boys, where boys feel really pressured by their peers, by their friends. Girls feel really pressured by their romantic partners. Okay? So there is a lot of pressure. There is a lot of influence from peers. But the source of the pressure is different. And you can see there's a solid almost fifth of young people who say they don't feel pressure to have sex, which is great that they don't experience pressure. But you can see that a lot of young people do feel some pressure. And again, what's moderating that effect? What's the other influence? And hopefully parents can be part of that other influence. But in order to be part of that other influence, your kids need to know what you think. You need to share your values. You need to let them know what your expectations are. You need to have these conversations. And it's not a talk. It's conversations over time. So the other thing that they've been looking at is sort of the gender role expectations. So this is what young people say about whether teen boys receive the message that they are expected to have sex. And the blue are the boys, age 12 to 19. The yellow are the girls. And the idea that they are expected to have sex, you can see here's the majority, over 60% of both boys and girls, do say that this is still a persistent gendered expectation, that adolescent boys are expected to have sex. And adolescent girls are expected to look sexy. So, and again, these are the pressures that they're experiencing. This is what they're hearing from their peers. And even though this is 2016, these influences are still very predominant. And finally, there's the issue of feeling pressured and doing things you might not wish you hadn't done and having regrets. So the question posed was, how often has someone pressured you to do sexual things that made you made you uncomfortable or took you farther sexually than you wanted to go? And what's really encouraging is that you've got a 68% of young people saying, of girls, and 81% of boys saying never. I have not felt pressured sexually to go farther than I wanted to go. But we also have 28% of girls and 17% of boys saying sometimes this has happened to me. And then a small percentage, 4% of girls and 2% of boys saying often. Okay, so they are experiencing pressure. They do need to figure out how to negotiate it. And then finally, in terms of the data, if you've ever had sexual intercourse, do you wish you had waited longer? And you can see the way this lays out. So these are sexually experienced teen girls, so girls who've ever had sex, ages 12 to 19, with 67% saying yes, they wish they'd waited longer, and 33% saying no. With the boys, a little over half, 53% saying yes and 47% saying no. And then if you look at the older teens, so 15 to 19, so taking out those younger kids, 55% yes and 45% no. And the very youngest teens, the 12 to 14-year-olds, a vast majority, 78% saying yes and 22% saying no. And again, we know that there are these kind of clusters of risk, especially with younger adolescents, that if you have so these are sexually experienced 12 to 14-year-olds. Okay, sexually experienced meaning they have had sex, not that they You know, I mean, it doesn't mean they're experienced in the way you might think. But they have had sex. And the vast majority of young adolescents say they wish they had waited longer. It is kind of the perfect storm with young adolescents because those young adolescents who are less supported, who have backgrounds where they have really difficult experiences, childhood abuse of any kind, physical abuse, emotional abuse, but most tellingly sexual abuse, are much more likely also to have an early sexual debut, to start having sex earlier, to make to feel like they have less control over their own decision making, feel like they don't have control over their lives, and to end up in pretty difficult situations. So that's kind of the lay of the land. You know that kids at your high school are sexually active. Kids in your child's grade are sexually active. Maybe your child is sexually active. So what do we want to do about it? How do we deal with this? How do we help young people to make better decisions? Well, the first thing you need to do, and this is taken from the literature from the national campaign, is that you need to really have good communication skills, and you need to use those skills that you have to communicate with your teenager. So it's important that they know your sexual values and attitudes, that they really understand where you stand. Okay? Don't assume that they know. Make a point of telling them, this is what I think is important. These are the values that we have in our family. These are our expectations of you. Talk with your kids early and often about sex and love, and be specific. So moms tend to do a better job of this than dads. Okay? Traditionally, dads are assigned to talk to their male children. Moms are assigned to talk to the female children. Moms tend to have conversations that include other aspects of sexuality and relationships. They talk more about relationships. They talk more about feelings. Dads, again, in the research, tend to have very brief conversations, pretty euphemistic, saying, you know, don't get a girl in trouble, you know what to do, watch out. Okay? So they don't know what to do. They may not be sure what you're talking about. They may know what you're talking about, but not know what to do. And they're not getting any messages about relationships, about knowing your partner, about being in a caring relationship, about being ready, about the responsibilities of being in a relationship or of engaging in sexual intercourse. So they're just getting this kind of, you know, very short message, do the right thing, you know what it is. But in reality, they may not know what it is. And if they do know what it is, it doesn't exactly help them to do the right thing anyway, because nobody's helped them to figure out how to stay out of situations where they might not be able to make the right decision or engage in healthy and appropriate decision making. So they need specific information. Again, you know, it's okay if it's you know, gendered and fathers feel more comfortable talking to their sons and mothers more comfortable talking to their daughters. But fathers could probably take some tips from mothers in terms of how to talk about this, because in general what we find is that it's a hard conversation for men to have with their kids, and they tend to only talk about they don't talk about the relational aspects. And yet we really want our kids to think about sexuality in the context of relationships, right? That sex is not just a physical act, that it has to do with an expression of feeling, of emotion, of commitment, of responsibility, of all these things that are in mature sexuality really are part of the package, are not necessarily part of the package for adolescents. And we really need to reinforce that it is part of the package. So you want to communicate, and that's an important piece. But you also want to keep an eye on your kids. You want to monitor and engage with them. So you need to supervise and monitor your adolescents. You need to have clear rules. They need curfews. They need to know the standards of what accepted behavior. They need to know what you expect from them. And they need consequences when they don't meet those expectations. Okay, you can't just brush it off and go, oh, well, girls will be girls, boys will be boys, oh, they were at a party. No, they really need to know that what you've told them is what you believe, and that you are willing to really enforce that in terms of consequences if they don't follow the rules. It's important that they understand why there are rules and what you're concerned about, and again, that you be very direct and clear about it. Again, as I mentioned before, know your kids' friends and know your kids' friends' families. This has been found to actually be a protective factor for adolescents when their parents know their friends and their families. Families are all different. They have different standards. And just like we would tell our, 5-year-old who wants to have the cupcake before they eat their food, no, we eat our food before we have our cupcake. And they say, but at Jimmy's house, you get to eat your cupcake first. It's like, well, that's Jimmy's house, right? And every family has different standards and different ways of doing things. But this is our family, and these are our standards, and this is how we're going to do it in our house. So knowing the standards and expectations in the families of your child's friends is very important. When your kid says, I want to go to a party at my friend's house, it's really appropriate for you to get some more information. Who is your friend? Do I know your friend? Who's going to be at the party? What adults are going to be there? It's appropriate for you to call those adults and say, are you going to be there? Did you know there's a party? And to let them know that your expectation is that being there means being present. So I'll tell you a little story. When my niece is now 27 and a social worker and doing fantastic, but she had her rowdy adolescent and she lived in Atlanta. And I get this phone call at about midnight one night, which is 3 a.m. in Atlanta, and she says, Auntie E, I don't know what to do. One of my friends, we can't wake him up. And I was like, where are you, Hannah? Oh, I'm at a party. What's going on? Well, we were just kind of messing around, and we've been drinking and just messing around. And I'm like, okay, Hannah, is there an adult there? Oh, yes, there's an adult. I said, well, where's the adult? Oh, they're sleeping. They went to bed. Okay, so the parents were there supervising the party, but the party was going on without the parents. So there was nobody really supervising. And this kid, luckily, and of course, they were afraid to wake up the parents because they were going to get in trouble. They were afraid to call 911 because they were going to get in trouble. And I'm like, Hannah, I'm 3,000 miles away, call 911, and then wake up the parents. And it turned out this kid he had overdosed on alcohol. He could very well have died if they hadn't gotten there, resuscitated him, gotten him, detoxed him. And the parents were completely oblivious. And, they had, of course, reassured everybody that, yes, we're going to be home and we're, in charge of this party. But, by 3 a.m. they'd gone to bed. So this kind of communication, your kid won't like it. How embarrassing. Nobody else does that. I can't believe you're doing this. I'll never go to school again. You've embarrassed me so terribly. But it's important, okay? Now, it doesn't have to be this whole formal thing if you have communication with your child's friends' parents. It can be an informal thing, just checking in. I hear you're having a party. Maybe they didn't know they were having a party. Oh, no, actually, we're going to Tahoe this weekend. Oh, okay, so then your kid isn't going to that unsupervised party. And when there's going to be an adult there, make sure it's not the 22-year-old sibling who's the adult who's there, but really who is going to be supervising. Because again, they don't have great problem-solving skills. And if you sat with my niece at a quiet moment and said, Hannah, if you were drinking with a friend and they fell over and you couldn't wake them up, what would you do? She'd probably say, I'd call 911. But in the heat of the moment, in those hot cognitions, all she could think about was how scared she was. Scared for her friend, scared for herself, scared of getting in trouble, scared of the police, scared of the parents. And this is a good kid, okay? This is not a kid who's out, in trouble, having problems. No, this is a good kid, high achiever, doing great. So that supervision is a really important part. And your kid will push back. They don't want to be supervised, okay? And it doesn't mean you have to, sit in the room with them. But, pass through the room periodically and refresh those sodas. Pass through the room periodically and check if there's no more nachos. But don't go to bed until all the kids are out of the house. Know what your kids are watching, reading, and listening to. It makes for great conversations, okay? So using those teachable moments, know what's influencing them, take the opportunity to talk about, boy, what happened in that story? What happened in that movie? What do you think you would do if you were in that situation? Where do you think he or she kind of got off the track there and things ended up in such a mess? So really using those opportunities. And maybe going to a movie that you wouldn't choose to go to because it's a great opportunity to see what your kid is watching and have a conversation afterwards. Then there are the structural changes that you want to make. So one is discouraging early, frequent, and steady dating. And this is absolutely rooted in the data that early, frequent, and steady dating equals sexual activity. Okay? That's the way it pans out. The longer an adolescent couple is together, the more likely they are to be sexually active. And at 16, that's a different story than at 14. Particularly because at 14, a 14-year-old girl is highly unlikely to have a 14-year-old boy as their partner. They're much more likely to have about a 2 to 3 years age difference, which in adolescence, because of those stages of development, is really significant. When you look at the age difference of partners sort of globally, adults have much larger age differences in their partnered relationships than adolescents do. But it's less significant in adulthood than it is in adolescence because of all the changing and all the development that's going on in adolescence. So you want to take a strong stand against your daughter dating a boy significantly older than she is, as in, no, you cannot date him. You're 14 years old, okay? It's hard to do. You may feel like you're being unfair. You're going to definitely hear from your daughter that you're being so unfair. I can't believe you don't trust me, right? You're treating me like a baby. All my friends get to date. You're making me different from everyone else. And they will give you a whole long list of all the horrible things that you've done to them because you said, no, you're 14, you're too young to date. But if you look at the data, 14 is too young to date. 14 is associated, dating at 14 is associated with early sexual debut. It's associated with older partners, again, because remember that picture, they're not looking at the little dudes, and it's associated with early sexual debut. And early sexual debut is then associated with poor contraceptive practices, unintended pregnancy, multiple partners, sexually transmitted infections. Every adverse outcome you can have related to sexuality in adolescence, you'll find in the kids who have an early sexual debut. So you want to take that stand. And it's not just for the girls, because boys can get in a pack of trouble as well when they have a younger partner. First of all, in the state of California, we have reporting laws, child abuse reporting laws. And in California, child abuse is not just, in some states it's adult, caregiver, and child. Oops. Oh, we don't want to connect to box. Sorry. So in California, it can be peer-on-peer abuse is reportable. And the state legislature in 1998 amended the child abuse law to include that sex between a youth who was under 14 and a youth 14 or older is reportable as child abuse. Okay? So that 15-year-old boy with a 13-year-old girlfriend now becomes a sexual predator. Okay? And this is a jacket that they keep that. Okay? It's a legal offense. If it is reported, they can be tried in both civil and criminal court, and they become a sex offender at age 15 because they had a 13-year-old girlfriend. Okay, so it's serious business. It's serious business for boys as well as for girls. For the older adolescents, for the 14s and 15-year-olds, just per the law, it's a partner who's 21 or older. And for the 16-year-olds, there is no age limit that defines abuse. Now, we always define abuse by the nature of the relationship. If in a professional's judgment it's an abusive or coercive relationship, then we report it regardless of age difference. But those age differences, even if the youth were to say, oh no, we're in love, this is what we both want to do, this is consensual, it's still reportable as sexual abuse. So it's important that you're talking with your boys about that as well. Not to mention that 13 and 14-year-old girls don't tend to be very good contraceptors. They may say, don't worry, I've got it covered, but they probably don't. And if they do, they're probably not doing a great job of keeping it covered. So this is really important information for both your male and female children. So you also want to make sure that they have things in their future that are attractive to them, more attractive than early childbearing. And so, making sure that even for those kids who maybe are not that academically successful, that they have other meaningful activities in their lives, that they have other things that they're thinking about in their future. Not everybody wants to go to college or to graduate school. I'm sure probably the majority of your kids plan to. Not everybody is successful. So making sure that they have things that they feel are important and meaningful that they want to do. But let them know how highly you value education. Again, it's that communication, letting them know what your expectations are. And if they're making efforts to reduce their sexual risk, instead of blaming and shaming, think about reinforcing. So the conundrum of the parent who finds the little plastic container with the birth control pills in their kid's backpack, or the condoms in their kid's backpack. And you know, you sit and you're shocked and you cry and you think, oh my God, what happened? How could I have not known? And then you may blow your stack at your kids. What is this doing in your backpack? I can't believe, how did you even go get this? How could you have gone without me? You know, what they need at that point is some reinforcement for really trying to make good decisions. That's a really important and difficult step for many young people to take. And I've been providing confidential services for adolescents for 30 years. I can tell you that this cuts across all ages, genders, socioeconomic status. They do have the right to confidential services under the law. They can seek care for pregnancy and pregnancy prevention. It's hard for them to do. They're scared, they're worried about their confidentiality, they're worried somebody's gonna find out, they're embarrassed, they don't know how to negotiate the systems, and yet they've gone through all these steps to really try and guarantee their own futures, that they're not going to be involved in an unintended pregnancy, that they're not going to end up in a situation that impairs their ability to go on to college or finish high school or meet your expectations or have your respect. And so that knee-jerk reaction of being infuriated, often which is driven by feeling really hurt that your kid didn't come to you, take a deep breath and try and remember that they have worked really hard to be responsible. And it's okay to express your disappointment. You know, I really would have liked if you had waited. I wish you had talked to me about this. But I'm really proud of you for doing what you could do to keep yourself safe and be responsible. Because it's that responsible act that you want to reinforce. It's not reinforcing the sexual activity to reinforce that they're being responsible about it. And it's okay to have that kind of double-barreled message. I'm disappointed that, you know, I assume from looking at these birth control pills, and they'll tell you, oh, Mom, no, I got them because I have such bad cramps, right? Well, probably if they got them because they have such bad cramps, they went with you to get them. You know, I have mothers and daughters in my clinic all the time who come for some form of managing their periods. But when they've gone on their own, it's probably because they're sexually active. And I think often we feel primarily disappointed. We feel disappointed that they're sexually active. We feel disappointed that they didn't talk with us about it. We feel disappointed in ourselves. What did I do wrong? Did I raise a daughter or a son who's having sex at 15? But in reality, when you find that method of birth control, what it should tell you is that they're really working hard to make responsible decisions. And they need to hear from you, included in that message that you're disappointed, that you're also proud of them for making those decisions, for making that effort, for going through all the hoops that they had to go through in order to get what they felt like they needed. So it's tough. It takes a lot of self-control, right? We as adults, we're supposed to have these very functional prefrontal cortexes, but that limbic system can completely overwhelm us as well. So it can be hard to be supportive, but it's important that you be supportive and acknowledge the hard work that your kid is doing when you find a situation like that. And then what about the talk? So you don't want to have a talk, you want to have a series of conversations. We really advocate that you start early and speak often about sex and sexual decision-making, relationships and relationship quality. What does it take to be a good friend? What are you looking for in a good friend? What is a good romantic relationship? What are you looking for in a romantic relationship or with a partner? If you have a child who has very conflicted friendship relationships in middle school, their romantic relationships often will take on that same kind of dynamic. So you really want to help them work on their friendship relationships. If they tend to get involved with other kids, same-sex peers who aren't very nice to them, help them figure out about friendships because they're going to mirror that same pattern in their romantic relationships. So middle school friendships are a really good indicator of the quality of romantic relationships that your high schooler will have. And they will, in general, have romantic relationships. Not all of them, but many of them. So you want to make sure that you're talking about, the talk needs to include the talks, all those talks, need to include the whole range, not just sexual safety, okay? It really needs to talk about relationship quality and what you're looking for in a relationship. Use those teachable moments when you're in the car and there's something on the radio, or, you know, like in my house we used to take turns who picked the radio station. So, you know, on the way to school it was NPR because I got to pick, and on the way home it was God knows what because my son got to pick. And so he listened to some pretty misogynistic messages in the music that he listened to. That's an important thing to point out. What is the message about women in this, you know, in that music we just listened to? Is that what you think? What do you think? What do your friends think? How do you, you know, oh no, I just like the beat. It's like, okay, well, but listen to the words. The words are really putting women down. Is that how you want to feel about a person that you're in a relationship with? So use those teachable moments. The movies don't show sexual decision making. Movies and TV now show a lot of sex, right? But they don't show very much sexual decision making. Movies and TV pretty much buy into this idea that there's this sort of inevitable process that gets started with the kiss, often with a no. So what are we teaching our kids? We're teaching them that no means yes, right? Because the woman says no, no, no as she melts into this deep kiss, and then the next scene is the clothing on the floor and the sheet over the back. So, you know, the messages that they're getting in the media are not around sexual decision making. It's a good opportunity when you see a scene like that to kind of deconstruct that scene later. What happened in that scene? What did you notice that was missing? You know, what would you have done? What if you wanted to kiss a girl and she was saying no, no, no? Do you think she means yes? Because that's the messages that they're getting, and they, you know, and they really do influence them. Again, not as much as you influence them, but you have to use your influence. If your child has a same-sex sexual orientation, it's going to become more evident in adolescence. It's important that you be aware that a rejecting response has very serious impact on both their mental health and their risk profile. So there's very good research that shows that rejection on the part of parents of their gay or lesbian or bisexual children results in much more engagement in substance abuse, much more risky sex, much more HIV risk, and very significantly, much more depression, suicidal ideation, and completed suicides. And these effects last into adulthood. That doesn't mean, you know, everybody, again, every family has their standards, every culture has their expectations, every individual has their ideas. For many parents, having a gay child is sort of losing their idealized child and their fantasy of what their child's future might be. So it can be a difficult road to walk. And it doesn't, and many parents aren't ready to necessarily be accepting, but to just be less rejecting is a step that's a positive step and which really improves the outcomes for your child. So if you are finding yourself struggling with these issues, there's wonderful resources. There's a project called the Family Acceptance Project that has beautiful parent education resources that really talk about the impact of your words and actions and how to moderate them, how to, you know, really follow your values, your religious teachings, and still not be rejecting of your child. Don't just talk about the health consequences when you're talking about sexuality and relationships, but also the social and emotional consequences that are associated with sex, because they are as important as the health-related consequences. And make sure that you discuss not just the risks, but also the benefits of the whole range of decisions. Because when we talk with young people only about the bad things that can happen, when they are full of their fantasies of all the good things that can happen, we're not communicating very effectively. So hearing from them, what do you think are you know, what are the good things about starting to have sex in your relationship? What's the downside of it? You know, let them know what you think are what's the downside, and whether you can think of some good things. What are the advantages of waiting? What are the disadvantages of waiting? what might happen in your relationship if you do decide to be sexually active. And ideally, we get to the point that we can have these conversations with our children, that it's not the forbidden content, but really things that we can talk with our children about. So I just want to say a little bit about parenting. You know, we get, as a society, there's a huge investment in the prenatal and 0 to 5. Lots of parenting advice, lots of parenting classes. You go to your pediatrician and they fill you with ideas about parenting, all the anticipatory guidance. By the time your kid gets to school age, if they're developing typically, you get a lot less guidance, and by the time they get to adolescence, you are on your own. But there are a lot of things about parenting a toddler kind of apply to parenting an adolescent. So when we look at parenting styles, there's two different categories that we look at. One is responsiveness, which is the extent to which the parent responds to the child's needs in an accepting and supportive manner. So we express this responsiveness through love and warmth and nurturance. And then there's demandingness, which is the extent to which parents expect and demand responsible behavior. And we usually express demandingness through discipline, control, and setting and enforcing rules and limits. So when you look at parenting style, over here is permissive parenting. So you have you have a lot of love, but low demands. Laissez-faire parenting, where there's not a whole lot of demands or love. Authoritative parenting, which is both high involvement, high demands, high love, and authoritarian parenting, which is a lot less nurturing and caring, but a lot of demandingness. Up here is the sweet spot, okay? That you're engaged with your child, that you care about your child, that your child knows that you love them, and that you love them unconditionally. You may not like what they're doing, you may not like the choices that they make, but as a being, at the core, you love them unconditionally. That by itself, however, isn't enough, right? Because if they're running the streets, running wild, full of love, but with no direction, control, responsibility, then they're not going to get through adolescence very safely. So they need both. They need that high level of love and acceptance for who they are, not necessarily for what they do, but for who they are. You are a good person. I care about you. But they also need to know I have expectations of you. If you don't meet those expectations, there are consequences. We have rules in our family. You know, you have responsibilities in the family, so that they're not just, you know, kind of cut loose to do whatever they want to do. And that's really the spot that you want to be, is an authoritative parent. And this is consistent throughout the life of your child, that really authoritative parenting is probably the best place to be. And it's where we see the best risk profiles with adolescents. With laissez-faire parenting and permissive parenting, we see a lot of risky behavior with because there's not a lot of supervision and control. With authoritarian parenting, we see a lot of risky behavior because kids find ways to sneak out and get away because, you know, they feel like they're living in a military camp. So you want to kind of look for that sweet spot where you're setting limits and have a high expectations and are also expressing your love and support for your child no matter what. So these are the five basics of parenting adolescents. Again, just sort of a summation that they really need your love, and they need you to connect with them. They need you to be present, okay? And that doesn't mean you're just like in the same building as them, but you're actually present, that you actually put away your work, close your laptop, put down your phone, and engage with them, and make them engage with you. Again, it is fine to have a rule at the table that the phones stay in the pocket, the purse, the whatever, that not everybody's sitting at the table with their phone in one hand and their fork in the other, because there's no connection there, okay? There's time for that, and there's time that that's not appropriate. And it's really, and kids will appreciate in the long run that you establish those rules as well. So they need you to love and connect with them. They need to be monitored and observed. They need feedback about their behavior. They need feedback about their decisions, and they need some direction about when they're wanting to do things that you don't think are appropriate or safe for them. And they need to know why, but they don't have to agree, okay? So you may not get to the point that they're like, okay, Mom, that's a great idea. Gee, Dad, I'm so glad that you're not letting me go out tonight, right? They're going to be mad. They're going to go in their room. They're going to slam the door. They're going to under their breath. But it's okay, because they know at the end of the day you love them, you care about them, and you're going to keep them safe. They need guidance and they need limits. Okay? They need to know that 14 is too young to date. That guy that you want to go out with is too old for you. Okay? That girl is too young for you. They need you to model appropriate decision making. And they need to have you as someone they can consult with about their own decision making. And they need opportunities, and they need an advocate. So what could be a really damaging experience can be turned around if you're there to not to blame them, but to listen to them, to hear their side of the story, to take their side, to advocate for them. It really makes a difference in their experience. A good example of that is kids that are being bullied at school. Sometimes the response to a child who's being bullied is to really blame the victim. You know, if you didn't do this, if you didn't do that, if you didn't act like that, if you didn't look like that, if you would just be more whatever, you know, you wouldn't be targeted, you wouldn't get bullied. So that's really blaming the victim, and it makes your child feel worse. When you can be supportive of them, I'm so sorry that this happened to you, it's not fair, it's not right, let's go, we're gonna go and talk to your teacher, talk to your principal, talk to the parents of that child who's bothering you. Really stand up for them. And believe it or not, your teenagers need that too. It's not just your little kids. Your teenagers need that too. And they're not gonna necessarily come home and tell you what awful things happened at school today. You have to kind of dig it out. So, you know, having that, those conversations, you know, how was your day? Fine. What did you do? Nothing. You know, how was your day? Boring. How was school? Boring. You know, dig a little deeper. Who did you hang out with? Did you have lunch with somebody? Did anything good happen today? Did anything bad happen today? And really watch their mood, because they are very, very impacted by the things that happen in their day-to-day life. And remember that they're spending the vast majority of their time now not with you, right? They're out in the world, they're at school, they're at sports, they're at clubs. I mean school clubs, not dance clubs. They're probably at dance clubs too. You know, they're out with their friends. So a lot of the things they're experiencing you don't know about if they don't tell you about them. And you're probably not going to get the whole story, but if you ask, you'll get part of the story. And really, when you see your child, particularly if they start to withdraw, they're not connecting with you, they're not connecting with their friends, those are signs of depression. Depression is a very significant problem in middle and late adolescence. And you really want to dig a little deeper and figure out what's going on and help them to get help if they need it. So remember that young people really do need to experience things. They cannot learn from your experience, much as we wish that they could learn from our experience so that they didn't have to make the same mistakes that we made, because everybody in this room made some mistakes. You don't have to share them, but you have to know them. But they really do need those hands-on opportunities. So, you know, give them those opportunities, but make sure that they're safe and supervised. And the level of safety and supervision should really match their level of maturity. So, you know, you might send your 14-year-old with a school group to Ecuador. You probably wouldn't send them by themselves. But your 18-year-old might be able to organize a trip where they're going by themselves and meeting other people or meeting up with a group there or whatever. So it really depends on your child. Provide opportunities for them to participate in decision making. So this is this very delicate dance where you need to be moved from being the CEO to a member of the board of directors. Okay? So with an early adolescent, you are the CEO. You are the boss. You are making the rules. You are telling them what they can and cannot do. With your middle adolescents, you should be having more of a conversation. And by the time you have a late adolescent, it really should be a consultation. Again, ultimately, you're the executive director, right? You're still going to make the final decisions, whether they get to borrow the car or don't get to borrow the car, get to go out tonight or need to stay in tonight, get to go with those friends to San Diego or don't get to go with those friends to San Diego. Those are decisions that you're still making as long as your child is your child living under your roof, and certainly under 18. But they should have more of a voice rather than you being sort of an absolute dictator by the time they're middle adolescents, because they need to practice that problem solving. So you need to be able to have those conversations, hear their voice, seek their opinions. You want their assumption of responsibility to be gradually increased so that they can develop their decision-making skills, so that they can really explore their own values and how they align with yours, so that they can refine their skills in the family and in the community. So that means you have to give sometimes when you might rather not, okay? That there may be times that you're not totally convinced that this is a great idea, but you trust your kid enough and the situation that they're going into enough to give it a try, and then debrief later. You have to decide what's worth going to the mat and what you're going to let pass. So this is not so different from having a toddler, right? You know they're going to have a temper tantrum when they don't get what they want, and you know, is this something that you're willing to go to the mat about? It's really important, or is this something you can give, right? So often our children will choose to wear clothing that we might not find attractive or appropriate, or you know, want them to wear. Remember that usually we're the ones who've bought it for them. So think about that before you bring it into the house. If it's not something you want them to ever wear, don't buy it for them. But make those decisions, you know, where are you going to give? Part of, you know, how they dress, how they wear their hair, how they do their nails is their own, you know, they're developing their sense of self and their self-expression. And maybe you don't like it, but maybe it's not so bad. And save the battles for what's really important to you. And most importantly, know that, again, they might, in a calm, quiet environment, be able to tell you everything you would ever want to hear about how they should make a decision and what they should do. But in the moment, they tend to make poor decisions. So you need to help them think through the what-ifs. Okay, so let's say your daughter wants to go out with her friends. And they want to go to a movie, and then they're going to go out to get something to eat, and it's a mixed group, and you're not convinced that this is really a safe idea, but you decide, well, you know, I know these kids, I trust my daughter, it's going to be okay. Okay? And they're going out now. This probably won't work in Marin because I don't know what kind of public transportation you have. So I'll give you an example from my own life with Bart and Uni. So the kids are going out and they're going to a movie, and I look at my watch and I'm like, boy. And you know, it's a group by my son and his friends, and they're all kids I know, and they're kids I like, and I know their families, and you know, they're good kids. So they're going out to the movies, and I look at my watch and I'm like, oh, you're going to the movies awfully late. How are you getting home? Oh yeah, we're just going to take Bart. So what time does Bart close? Oh, I didn't think about that. When does the last train run? Oh, I don't know. Well, go look online and find out when the last train runs. Oh, okay. So find out when the last train runs. And we figure out, well, you can't go to the movies in South City or Daly City and get back on the BART because the BART train isn't running that late. So what are you going to do? So really thinking through the whole process. Instead of leaving it for your son and daughter to go to catch the BART and realize, oh, the BART isn't running anymore. How am I going to get home? Oh, there's a guy, maybe he'll give us a ride. There's a, you know, just they're going to make poor decisions. So helping them think through the whole process. What are you going to do? When your child is dating, what if you had a fight with your boyfriend, girlfriend? You know, what if you didn't want to get home, you know, you didn't want to get in the car with them? What would you do? How would you get home? What if they were drinking? You know, we teach our kids not to get in the car, to drive a vehicle or get in a vehicle with someone who's drinking or under the influence of drugs. How are you going to solve this problem? What are you going to do? And letting them know that you would rather that they call you and call a cab and come home than that they be ashamed or afraid of getting in trouble and not let you know what's going on and decide to get in that car with a driver under the influence and never come home because they had a fatal car accident. Okay? So these are the kinds of things you need to help them think through. Oh no, Mom, I'm not ready for sex. We're not going to have sex. Well, what if, what if, what if? And maybe, even though I think it's a great idea that you're never going to have sex, or you're not going to have sex till you're in a serious relationship, or you're not going to have sex until you're married, or whatever it is that they're telling you, I want you to think through the what-ifs. What would you do if? And really help them do that problem solving, because they don't do that problem solving very effectively on their own. So at the end of the day, loving and caring and connecting with your kid is the most important thing you can do. Closeness really makes a difference. Again, and this is based in the data, that parental caring and concern, being present in the home, not just physically present, but engaged, engaging in shared activities, doing things with your kids, and just overall closeness is very protective and is associated with healthy development and resilience in your teen children. So that's what I have to say. I would love to hear what you have to say, what questions you have, what you want to talk about. Yeah?
Well, I have a brief comment and then a question. And the comment is just a plug for the Be the Influence program. That is everything that you've been talking about that Redwood and Drake have in their schools. And it's about parents realizing that they're the most important influence in their kids' lives and connecting with other parents and getting to know their kids' friends and all the things that you've been talking about. So if you don't know what it is or more curious, just go on our PTSA website. My question
Oh, that's
is,
great.
Yeah,
So that's
and
wonderful.
all three of the schools actually in our district have a program. My question is, what does the hookup culture, if you could talk about that a little bit, which to me is the flip of having sex after you're dating. It's having sex and then deciding whether you want to date, and if you could talk about that a little bit.
So these are the things, it's whatever the New York Times Magazine is, is featuring this month. And often parents get very concerned about, the hookup culture, about friends with benefits, about, all of these things that they hear. Now, is it real? Yes. Is it everyone? No. Remember that in the popular media, they tend to use, anecdotal evidence. So it's, somebody's story. They might hook into a subculture, a subset, a group of young people. It may be going on here, it may not. It does not tend to be it's presented as if this is what everybody's doing, but it usually isn't what everybody's doing. That said, there's all sorts of different ways of exploring sexuality, and there are young people who explore sexuality by connecting with other young people and being sexual with them in the absence of a relationship. Again, I think that the most important thing you can do is talk about it. Oh, I read this thing in the New York Times and I'm wondering, do you think that's happening at your school? What do you think about that? And really know what your kid thinks, And if they think that this is a good way to get to know people or to choose a partner, then it's important that they hear your opinion about it, but it's also important that they get messages about safety. And it's not just sexual safety. It's not just HIV risk. It's not just chlamydia risk. Not that those aren't really important things, but it's also emotional risk. It's how are you going to feel if you decide to have sex with this person and the next day they walk past you like they don't even know you, and you have 3 more years to be in high school with them. So it's talking about those kinds of risks as well as the physical and sexual health risks.
And Erica, before we take any other questions, I wanted to introduce someone else who's here who could probably speak to that and let you know if there's a hookup culture at our high school. And this is Jennifer Kennybaum. She's the coordinator of the Wellness Center here at Redwood. So,
Jennifer, you want I don't think I've done a real good job with the microphone tonight. I did my best.
I need the mic. I'm sorry, I have a terrible cold. About to lose my voice. So I want to make sure that there's enough time because I feel like this presentation has been really rich with information, and I want to make sure that one of the things that really impressed me about the conversation and the data that you showed was that you as parents are really the biggest influence in your kids' sexual decision-making process. 38% of all the kids cited that you are the #1 influence. So, sadly, as an educator, we're only 4% of the influence. But
you should say healthcare providers.
I know. We feel like we should really be, such a large influence. But one of the questions that I wanted to make sure to preemptively answer for you as a parent is what is really being offered for your child on campus in terms of education and access to resources. So again, my name is Jen Kennybaum. I'm the new wellness coordinator here at Redwood. I'm fortunate enough to open up the first wellness center in TAM Unified. And one of the things that we provide on campus for students is all support services related to how students feel physically or emotionally, and that includes reproductive health. So one of the things that I just want to let you know in terms of what kind of education your kids are getting is as of January 1st, the California law has mandated that kids receive access to comprehensive sexual health education, and we are ahead of the game here at Redwood. They are receiving that right now through their 9th grade social issues courses, and one of the things we've done in the Wellness Center is get the teachers trained in the latest curriculum called Be Real, Be Ready, that they received an all-day professional development through Planned Parenthood with that newest curriculum. So the teachers have been trained in the latest educational, all their reproductive health, all the latest birth control methods to be able to teach that to students in class. What else did I want to make sure around that? We also try our best to link the social issues teachers to providers in the community who also offer workshops in specialty areas where the teachers might feel like they're a little bit out of date. So if they had questions around, say, for example, prescription drug abuse, I know that doesn't quite relate to sexual health, but if there was something, a topic area that they were like, I'm not really sure, I know that I feel comfortable talking about condoms to my students, but female condoms, is that still a thing? I don't really know how to teach that. We would make sure to get those teachers connected to a provider who could come in to give the latest information and data to students. So that's part of our goal. On top of that, we're really trying to link students who are going through that process when they know that they're questioning, they think they're entering a sexual relationship, a place, an adult, a confidential space where they can talk to an adult about that, and also help get them connected to a teen clinic off campus where they'd be able to receive confidential medical services. We have those listed on our website if you're interested in looking at what those teen clinics are. And we currently on campus have a condom availability program. We try to make that as destigmatizing as possible. We train the peer resource students on campus to actually provide the condom education once a month at lunchtime. We had our first event in January, and we condom certified 170 students. Basically, the kids put together 17 different steps to show how you actually put a condom on, and they have to go through and put a puzzle together to show what those 17 steps are. And once they're condom certified, they're able to receive condoms on campus. In addition, we're working hard to try to bring Marin Community Clinic on campus to provide some comprehensive reproductive health services on campus. So that might include providing some accessibility for students to receive confidential STI testing, access to birth control, and emergency contraception. So those are just a few of the things that we're working on. In addition, I think we're trying to do some fun things to provide education too that are destigmatizing for students. We're going to be doing a sexual health awareness event with the peer resource students where it'll be an outdoor games, activities that are all educational, getting students thinking around making healthy choices.
So what about Drake?
An excellent question.
You've got a survey, but so when's that going to happen?
That is an excellent question. Unfortunately, I cannot answer that for you. I know that the hope would be to expand wellness services to both Drake and TAM.
Of course.
Yeah.
So nobody's got any answer on that. Is it how this goes, how your program, how how this school goes? Or
Well, I know
is the
what they're doing
decision?
right now at TAM, at Drake.
Okay.
You know, I can't speak exactly to that because I'm a part of that planning process. But I know at Drake, Jessica Colvin, who's the director of the wellness, the wellness program at TAM, is working with creating a design team at Drake to look at what are actually the needs of the site. So instead of just creating a model that's just based on what we've done here at Redwood, is they're working with parents, teachers,
Yeah,
students.
Because we've had a survey.
Yes.
So-
No, there's
Yeah.
also a group that's
Okay,
meeting
'cause,
regularly.
I mean, I don't need to tell me it's going to happen in 4 years' time. No?
Yeah, no, there's a group meeting regularly to plan it out.
Yeah.
And show up at the board meeting, the school board
Exactly.
meetings on March 8th and March 22nd, and that's when they're going to be talking about wellness.
Okay, thank you.
In
That's
addition
good
to tonight.
information. That's the best answer. Right, thank you.
Great, thank you. So with that, oh, yeah.
Follow on to that, so is it such that Redwood receives some sort of special award?
Hi, I'm David Sondheim. I'm principal at Redwood. Welcome. Thank you very much. I think the answer to your question is in the spring of last year, essentially funds were approved for the positions that are currently in place, Jen's position, Jessica's position, as well as future positions at Drake and TAM. So the board's in the process, and the district's in the process of rolling that out. I think what may have some folks concerned is that people are worried because we're also experiencing enrollment growth with flat budget. So will that have an impact? And there's a budget study committee that's looking at how that increase in enrollment, how we'll handle that. I think we'll know better as we move forward. I think they're looking at it. But essentially, it's been approved, and now it's in the process of moving forward at those sites. It may be at different rates, and we'll know more as time goes along. If that helps. I wish I could give you more definitive, but they're working on it. That's right, and it's funded district funding. Jen's position, Jessica's position have been district funding, as well as Hannah Benitez, who's not here tonight. Is all district funding. There isn't special funding other than community partnerships that our Wellness Center has established and is bringing people in, has helped tremendously.
So I just wanted to say something about the sexuality education at school. Be Real, Be Ready is a great curriculum. It has a lot of active learning in it. And it's really important that parents engage with the curriculum as well. Ask your kid about their health curriculum. Ask them what they're learning. The curriculum includes homework where kids have to come home and interview their parents, talk with their parents about their attitudes and beliefs. So it's really oriented towards helping young people engage with their parents around issues of sexuality. So do engage with them about it. Know what they're learning. Let them know what you agree with and what you don't. So that because it's very important that they kind of figure out how to take what they're learning here and how it fits with the standards in their own households and families. Other questions, comments? Yeah.
I feel that we focus so much on, when I was listening to you about how to do this and how to do that, when, to kids that are going to be sexually active, instead of more the romance or the feelings, I find that that's gone. When I hear kids talk about it, especially boys, there's not so much feelings that they put across. And it's really something, that I'm trying to focus on.
Right, so I don't know if you remember when you were an adolescent, but the boys probably weren't talking about feelings then either. Boys don't have a lot of skills around talking about feelings often. I think that one of the things that's really nice about Be Real, Be Ready is that it does really talk about romantic relationships and what it means to be a good partner, a good friend, and the feelings in relationships. And also really focuses on relationship quality, what makes a good boyfriend or girlfriend, what makes a good friend. But again, a lot of this is our job. I think that we feel very comfortable saying, fine, school, you do it, right? Because I'm a little uncomfortable, I'm not sure what to say, I'd rather not. It's really important that we partner with the schools and know that it's our job to really do this education with our children as well. And I agree that often school curriculum, not this one actually, but school curriculum will be very focused on the how-tos and the what-ifs and we call it the plumbing, these are your body parts, this is how the egg moves down the fallopian tube, and not really about romantic relationships. And yet that's what's really driving all this, is romantic relationships. So you're right, it's a very important thing to talk about, but we need to step up and do that with our kids. Yeah. Yeah.
You had talked about relationships between, for instance, an older boy, younger girl, or the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the opposite age. What about peer age kids, both 15 or both 16, both 17? At what point do you say, you always talk about it, but do you just emphasize responsibility and good decision making and
So yes, but not in those kind of big header kind of, it's not responsibility, good decision. It's really the concrete what-ifs, how-tos about responsibility and good decision making. So if you have a kid who has an age peer, boyfriend, girlfriend, they seem to they spend a lot of time together, they seem to really like to be together, they look for ways to be together alone. You need to be talking with your kid about their relationship, what you observe in their relationship, what you like about their relationship, what your concerns are, and be direct and concrete about it. You don't have to dance around the edges. Because they're thinking about sex, So it makes sense that you might be thinking that they're thinking about sex. And it's a conversation you want to have. Better to have the conversation than to not. So again, your child is not necessarily going to be super receptive to that. They'll find it embarrassing. They'll think you're so strange. Oh, God, Mom. But it is really important. I'm going to go here and then there. Yeah.
Comment and then a couple related questions. First, I wanted to thank all three of you and our public educators for working late and putting in heartfelt work for our kids, so we really appreciate that. And then two quick questions. The first is there any way for a parent to get the actual materials that are being used in the educational courses? Because I ask my kids, and they don't really want to tell me which chapter they're on. So I'd be interested in that. And then the second thing is I reflect on when I was a kid in Michigan, which now looks very, looks like a different century because it was. We had the opportunity to sort of play doctor, be with the opposite sex, because we went to a little neighborhood school in a little town. Our kids they don't have those opportunities, right? Typically mom's driving somewhere. Kids are always being supervised when they're together. And I've just been curious about how that impacts how the kids learn to relate to the opposite sex as they become older.
So they don't have as many opportunities. They don't have as many unsupervised opportunities, and some of these things you were talking about, like playing doctor, is very normative part of exploration and development. We don't really know how, like a cause and effect, how that influences development, but we do know that girls have a lot more opportunity to practice relationships than boys do. Girls are encouraged to have a very close, girlfriend that they spend a lot of time together and they talk about everything together. Boys are encouraged to play with, in larger same gender groups. More physical activity, more organized activity, and less just hanging out and being friends. So, what that results in is that girls have better relationship skills earlier than boys. Not that guys don't catch up, they certainly can, but girls tend to be leaps and bounds ahead of boys up through, their 20s. But we really don't know, in the long run, what are the repercussions of having, sort of this reality where children are supervised a whole lot. On the other hand, we know that with adolescents, often there's not enough supervision rather than too much.
Do you want me to answer the first part of that?
Mm-hmm.
What I would say, the answer to your first part is yes. And then the method by which you would see materials, I would recommend if your student is in that class, best bet is talk to the teacher. If you either don't get a response or it takes too long, contact the administration, either the assistant principal or the principal at the school, and they'll help you. But you are absolutely allowed to and should be afforded the opportunity to look at the materials if you'd like.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I can also just let you know that I've been generally polling the social issues teachers because I want to know when they're teaching sexual health so that we can time our event with when it might work with the classes. And the majority of them seem to teach sexual health in late April to May. Kind of save the best for last, they say.
Well, also the only thing I would add is they feel like they want to get a relationship between them and the students and a safety in the classroom to get to that place, because it's among the more difficult, I think, as you've heard, topics and areas to cover.
So what's a reasonable age for kids to start dating when it's just, they're not supervised and they're not in a group, and it's one boy, one girl, or
So it's going to very much depend on your kid, and again, your cultural expectations, your family values. But for most kids, probably 16, 17. Some kids 15. Definitely not younger.
And ideally, they're with somebody very close.
And they don't have to be the same age. And again, once you get to be 16, then 16. The difference between 16 and 18 is not as significant. It's for the younger adolescents that the age difference. It's just the younger adolescents are they're so childlike in so many ways. And in terms of their decision making and their morality, they're childlike. That they're just not ready for those pressures. But I think it's really, it's very individual dependent. I don't think there is a right age. It's more like when your child feels they're ready, when you feel they're ready, when you feel like, you really trust them to know what risks they might be taking and how to make good decisions, and and also that you see a relationship that you feel comfortable with, and that you feel comfortable reinforcing. Because basically, letting your kid date somebody is that you feel comfortable reinforcing their relationship.
So, and as a guy who went to Redwood, if you told me that I could go to your room and I'm going to be certified for condom fitting, I would have, me and my friends would have just been just amazed. I mean, I got to tell you, it's almost like being in a Twilight Zone. I mean, so is anybody saying, hey, you should just abstain? I mean, you shouldn't do this? I mean, it seems like my kids are in grade school, so I'm way far away from this, but not that far. But I'm thinking to myself, the messages we're giving, I mean, I guess what we're saying is it's going to happen anyway, so we're going to be proactive. But I mean, what is that? Are we saying anything else besides that? Like, is there anything about the emotion and the relationship skills and, that kind of thing being talked about when they're getting certified for condom fitting? I just, where, is that it? Or is there, we're just saying, yes, here you go? I mean, is that what's going on here at Redwood?
Good question.
I mean, maybe I'm the only guy thinking that, but, I'm just thinking to myself, what's the deal?
That's a good question. I'd have to say, when we talk with the peer resource students and we have them go and give the education, there's always a component that's around, are you ready? Part of one of the 17 steps, if you look at it, is about talking to your partner and seeing if you're ready. That, I think, is part of that whole sexual decision-making process. Are you ready for a sexual relationship? Is your partner ready for it? Have the conversation. Continue to get consent and continue to get consent. There's a whole concept out there right now around affirmative consent. So I think when we're talking about that and we're doing condom education, we're not in that specific moment teaching just say no. We're talking about how to educate yourself if you choose to do it, how to stay safe. But we aren't saying that everyone should choose to do it. We also recognize that there's a lot of students who come up, especially in groups, that might feel pressure to come up because their friends are coming up in groups. They might not be ready. They might not be ready to have sex. If you noticed that statistics that's on there around, do boys feel pressure to have sex? Do they feel this pressure to come up and get the condoms, to act like they're having sex, to act like they might be ready? That could be very real pressure for them. Our hope is that if they are feeling that pressure anyway, that they will at least be armed with some information on how to keep themselves and their partner safe. So I would love to show you.
For kids who don't have a driver's license, we're going to give them some rubbers, though. Whoa, that just sounds like it's a recipe for one thing. I mean, it's
Right.
So we do know for sure.
We're almost condoning it.
That condom there's good research on condom availability programs, okay? And what they found is that condom availability programs do not encourage kids to have sex, but they do result in kids having more protected. Those who are having sex have more protected sex. And there's studies, the first school-based condom availability programs were in New York. And they did really good research looking at first, their population, who was sexually active, who wasn't. They initiated the program, and then they looked at, was there an increase in the numbers or percentage of kids who were sexually active? And was there an increase in the amount of protected sex?
And do the
and what
parents
they found,
know that they're getting those?
Yes, well, it's what's in most places.
They know.
What they do is, you can say I can't remember what it's called, reverse consent. It's like you can say no.
It's a negative.
The assumption is yes unless you say no. So you have to do something in order to restrict access. But there's it's the understandable fear that any parent has, that you're basically saying, okay, here's permission to go out and have sex, and so if we give you condoms, we're saying we think it's a great idea, go for it, and that's going to result in more kids being sexually active. And first of all, it's not the message. It's not, everybody should be having sex, go out and have it. It's that if you're having sex, you should be having protected sex. And then the data shows that it's not that more kids have sex, it's that more kids who are having sex are protected, which is the goal.
And I got to say, and this is not research-based, is based on my experience as an educator in the 25 or 30 years, is that their awareness of what it takes to be safe and be thoughtful in itself is a bit of provides a resistance to going forward when they're not ready. They know, you talk to any kid, they know that they need to be safe. When I was growing up, people didn't think about it the same way. And so now there is, I believe, more thought than there certainly was when I was a kid. And I think that combined with the data you talk about, to me, is we're irresponsible not to provide them. And like she said, we have negative consent as a possibility, so if that's something you want to do, you have that option.
I wanted to thank
it-
everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Well over time.
Oh,